Welcome to episode 20 of Arbiter of Worlds. If you're a returning subscriber, thanks for supporting the channel. If you're new to the channel, hello! Here at Arbiter of Worlds, we study the art and science of running and creating tabletop role-playing games. So let's get into it. Today we're going to discuss the trouble with Thieves. If you're an old school gamer, you already know what I'm talking about. The Thief class has been a perennial sore point within old school gaming circles. It's been less so in new school gaming circles, but not because they solved the problem. They just eliminated most of the exploration phase of the game and got rid of the traditional Thief class. And that's too bad, because from the Grey Mouser to Kujal the Clever to Loch Lamora to Sinbad, the Thief is one of the most common archetypes in myth, legend, and fantasy. Thieves are supposed to be audacious risk-takers who infiltrate impenetrable fortresses, steal the crown jewels, kidnap the princess on the way out. And what thieves are not supposed to be is massively multiplayer game strikers who deal more damage than Conan the Barbarian. Old school critics of the Thief often assert that there should not even be a Thief class at all, as the customary activities of a thief, breaking into places and taking the stuff there, are essentially what all adventurers do all the time in old school gaming. And they'll point out that the original Dungeons & Dragons didn't even have a Thief class, and they'll cite the years of early Blackmoor and Greyhawk play as clear evidence that the Thief class wasn't necessary. On the other hand, the Thief class really was added very quickly to D&D in Supplement Number 1, Greyhawk, published in 1975. And it remained part of the game until it was largely eliminated with exploration-focused gameplay in D&D 3rd edition. But even those old-school players who feel that Thieves should be a class often assert that the particular mechanics by which they operate are not fun. New school players, on the other end, don't even use Thieves anymore. They use rogues. The current D&D rogue is essentially based on MMORPG design theory that differentiates a damage dealer from a tank class. The rogue is essentially a lightly armored mobile warrior with high damage output, and the entire corpus of the old school thief abilities gets relegated to proficiency with thief tools or proficiency with stealth, both traits that other classes could get. It doesn't have to be this way. Let's break down the trouble with Thieves and explain how to fix them. Trouble number 1. The first point we have to tackle is, are thieves even necessary? To answer this, we have to go back to my earlier video on balancing player skill versus character skill in RPGs. The basis for the assertion that thieves aren't necessary is that thief-like activities, such as searching for traps or moving cautiously and stealthily, should be matters of player skill rather than character skill. In such campaigns, the player is expected to describe every minutia of his search in great detail, and the GM in turn is expected to describe what is discovered in great detail, back and forth, like the reader of a mystery novel trying to solve the mystery based on the clues the author is dropping in the text. Now, as I said in my earlier video, this is where I think rulings not rules or mother may I gaming totally fails, because it assumes that characters are infallibly mindful and attentive as long as their players say they are. And it assumes that characters have mechanical aptitude at solving tasks equal to the player's verbal attitude at describing the solution. But that's nonsense. Some people are exceptionally perceptive and mindful, others are not. Yours truly can look straight at a misplaced object and not see it. And if I was a character, anytime I said, I searched the room, the GM would say, you don't find anything, because I don't ever find anything. Likewise, I have truly exceptional verbal aptitude. I could write an amazing essay about how to fix a car engine, but if you present me with an actual car, I cannot fix a car engine. The difference between the to-do list and the doing, between looking and seeing, between listening and hearing, this needs to be modeled mechanically for the character. If the game doesn't do that, if the GM insists that player skill should trump rather than synergize with character skill, then the dungeon exploration phase of the game is removed from the mechanical framework. To put it bluntly, if you assert that dungeon exploration is the job of the player and not the character, then of course a character designed for dungeon exploration is pointless. You made him pointless by removing his activities from the mechanics. Now, of course, old school D&D, starting with Greyhawk, did include mechanics for thief players. So why would those mechanics be so often ignored or condemned? Well, that leads us to trouble number 2. Trouble number 2 is that the mechanics for thieves in old school RPGs are extremely punitive in 4 ways. The first punitive mechanic afflicting thieves is that their skills are not reactive to the environment. An elf in BX or AD&D has a chance to detect any secret door he passes automatically and reactively without requiring the player to specifically state the elf is looking for secret doors. But thieves, even high-level thieves, never get to use their skills reactively. If they want to search for traps, they have to specifically state, I am searching for traps, and bring the game to a halt. That leads to the second punitive mechanic. Every use of thief skills in old school RPGs takes a full turn, 10 minutes of game time. That means that torches are burning down, wandering monster checks are occurring, spell durations are expiring. But this is not entirely a bad thing. Time management, like resource management, is part of old school play, and allowing players to evaluate the risk versus reward of investing time in tasks is good. No, where the punitive aspect arises is that the thief has no mechanical way to hasten his attempts by trading difficulty for speed. Imagine a master thief with a 90% chance to find a trap or open a lock. It still takes him a full turn. He is afforded no way to hastily search at some reduced percentage. The thief has no way to hurry the heck up. From a simulationist standpoint, that's absurd. Skilled lockpickers on YouTube show off by how fast they can open locks, not by whether they can open locks. From a gamist standpoint, it's problematic because it puts the thieves' time management incentives directly in opposition to the parties. The thief can only ever use his abilities if the group decides to move very slowly and methodically. But the party, especially mid-level parties, has countless incentives to move fast, largely due to the ticking of spell durations. And that leads to the third punitive mechanic. By virtue of the spell repertoires extended to spellcasters in old school RPGs, spellcasters can do virtually everything thieves can do with greater speed and higher reliability. Consider a thought experiment. You are a mage, and you are currently benefiting from a spell, a buff, with a duration of 3 turns. What is your cost-benefit analysis of allowing the thief to spend 3 turns searching a room versus you casting Find Traps? If you let the thief spend the 3 turns, you're down 1 spell because your buff expired, and maybe the thief found something. If you just cast Find Traps, then you're down 1 spell, but you saved 3 turns, and you know with certainty it will succeed. Now, speaking of certainty, that leads to the fourth punitive mechanic. Thieves fail quite often and get harshly penalized for failure. The chances of success for low-level thieves are 5% to 20% each time they act, which is much less than the chance of a low-level fighter succeeding on an attack. Worse, a thief in BX or AD&D can only try to pick a particular lock or find and remove a particular trap once. If he fails, he can't try the same lock or trap again until he reaches a higher experience level. Imagine playing a fighter where you have only a 5% chance to hit the monster, and if you miss your first attack on the monster, you miss all future attacks on it too until you level up. These 4 punitive mechanics work together in careful orchestration, specifically affording misery to the thief. These mechanics make thief players miserable. Fortunately, all of these problems can be fixed in a way that empowers thieves without detracting from the risk, the uncertainty, and the time pressure of old school play. And I know they can be fixed because I fixed them in ACKS II. In ACKS II, the first thing we did is we removed all of the spells that identically duplicate thief skills. There is no longer a knock spell. There is no longer a find trap spell. A mage can open a door with a battering ram spell where he bashes it down, but he can't just unlock it like a thief. Second, all thief skills can be used either hastily or methodically. If you use a thief skill hastily, it takes just 1 combat round, not 1 turn. If you fail, you can't try again hastily, but you can try again methodically. And when you use a thief skill methodically, it takes 1 turn, but you get a +4 bonus, and if you fail, you can try again. Finally, if you're moving at exploration speed, which is that slow 120 foot per turn speed that characterizes old school RPGs, if you're moving at exploration speed, you automatically are assumed to be hastily searching as you move. So like the elf, our thief can now automatically spot things, not with the same reliability as a methodical search, but there's a chance. So with rules that took me about 4 sentences to explain to you, this entire punitive arrangement that's been punished thieves for decades is fixed. But there's still one more trouble with thieves. Trouble number 3. Thieves are supposed to work in the shadows, but they can't see in the dark. Worse, not only can they not see in the dark, almost everybody else can see in the dark. 80% of the playable races in old school D&D and 99% of the monsters have infravision. What is infravision? It's today what we'd call thermal imaging. It's the force multiplier that has made the US Army the greatest nighttime fighting force in history. It's how M1 Abrams demolish enemies in pitch darkness when the enemy can't even see them. And it's basically given to everyone in old school RPG worlds. Everyone except thieves, or human thieves if you're playing AD&D. The one character class that as part of its class most needs the ability to function in darkness isn't afforded any ability to do so. Imagine being a ninja in feudal Japan sneaking through the estate of the great daimyo, only to discover all the samurai have thermal imaging goggles and you show up like a red-hot beacon on approach. And that's what it's like sneaking around in a dungeon in old school D&D. So this troubling issue ties into the 4 punitive mechanics too. An elf in BX can walk in total darkness down the hallway and automatically detect a hidden door. A thief in BX needs torchlight to see it all and doesn't have any chance to detect the hidden door unless he somehow says, "I bet there's a hidden door here," and convinces his party to give him 10 minutes of searching while the torch he needs burns down. And yet most GMs and game designers take for granted that this is how it should be because that's how it's always been. Well, it's not how it should be. In ACKS II, none of the demi-human races have infravision, or as we call it, lightless vision. Dwarves, elves, gnomes, halflings, none of them can automatically see in the dark. And lightless vision doesn't function like thermal vision. Thieves, meanwhile, along with related classes, get a power I call shadowy senses. This concept of shadowy senses came to me while I was working on the game design for Ascendant, where I researched real-life superpowers. Daniel Kish, who lost both his eyes as a child to retinoblastoma, developed echolocation abilities sufficient to enable him to bicycle through traffic and hike on steep mountain trails. And after he proved it could be done, others have learned to echolocate. Veronica Seider of Stuttgart, Germany, has a visual acuity of 20/2, granting her vision that is 10 times better than a normal human. Helen Keller could recognize friends by the feel of their faces, read lips by touch, and she was able to hear by feeling the vibrations made by sounds with a sensitivity sufficient that this deaf woman could hear a pencil falling off a desk. Her family could call her to a meal by knocking on a wall. Carrie Barkham is a super sniffer who can smell when another person has a stomach virus or a cavity. Her smell is so sensitive, it's similar to that of a sniffing dog. And a number of people have been identified as having golden ears. The average person can hear 1 decibel, but golden ears can reliably discern tiny frequency differences of less than 0.1 decibel. So what I learned was that ordinary human beings can, with some mix of talent and training, develop senses that are almost superhuman. And that's what shadowy senses represents for thieves. It's a blend of superior night vision, human echolocation, sensitive touch, acute olfaction, and other real human sensory traits that enable thieves to function in most circumstances without needing a light source. Add it all together, and now suddenly it becomes possible for the thief to sneak ahead of the party under the cover of darkness, hastily searching for traps as he moves silently, lying in wait in shadows for foes. As it should be. Now, I don't necessarily expect anyone listening to think that everything I've said above is exactly correct or exactly how they do it. Gamers love to argue. We know this, and I'm sure this video will spawn some arguments. So let me therefore leave you with this final thought. Problems in RPGs often arise from mechanics that are hidden deep in the game design, so deep that they're taken for granted. But these problems are not inevitable. They can be fixed. Quadratic wizards and linear fighters, troubles with thieves, these are problems that are solvable, and the solutions don't have to detract from the old school style that so many of us love. It just requires a commitment to the craft of game design. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, please use your thief skills to unlock the like and subscribe buttons and leave a comment in Thieves Camp. I will see you next week.